But I'm very happy to introduce Dr. Sylvia Morelli. Dr. Morelli received her bachelor's degree from Princeton in 2005, so she's used to the cold a little bit. She received her PhD in social psychology from UCLA, my alma mater, so I love it, in 2012. She's currently a postdoctoral scholar at Stanford University, working in the social neuroscience lab, where she's funded by an NRSA from NIH. She's received a number of awards, including Education Awards. So far, going strong, and all of them are in very high-quality journals, such as Neuroimage, Social Cognitive and Affective Neuroscience, and Journal of Cognitive Neuroscience. Her research focuses on understanding emotional processes through examining how people share emotions, empathy, the emotions of others, and to respond when others empathize with them. And she uses a variety of methods, including fMRI, daily diary studies, self-report, and others. She's developed a broad understanding of psychological and neural processes underlying empathy. The title of her talk today is Positive: The Structure and Relationships with Pro-Social Behavior, Social Connection, and Well-Being. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Morelli.
Thanks so much for that introduction and for having me out. I've already had a great time meeting with people, and I'm looking forward to meeting with other people later today to talk more about my research. So you might be wondering, what is positive empathy? So it might be what you feel when you see your niece open her first birthday present. It might be the excitement that you feel when you hear that your best friend is engaged. Or it might be the joy that you feel when you see your brother finish his first half marathon. In other words, positive empathy is our ability to share and enjoy other people's positive emotions. And when you think about these examples, as well as positive empathy in your daily life, we could make some observations about positive empathy. First, it often happens every day and sometimes multiple times a day. Well, we can think about times where we empathize with really big moments, like someone getting engaged. We often are empathizing with smaller events, like hearing that your spouse met their goal for exercising that day. Another observation that we can make is that when we share some emotion and own mood, in addition, it often makes us feel closer to people. So even if you haven't talked to someone in a long time, if you pick up the phone and hear that they've received a new job, you instantly feel more connected to that person. So thinking about this, it seems like positive empathy is both central and important in our daily emotional lives. But if we turn to the literature on empathy, it's primarily focused on empathy for other people's negative emotions. So Daniel's classic work clearly looks at empathy for things like pain and sadness. And he looks at how it might motivate us to help others. If we look at the most commonly cited empathy scale, the interpersonal reactivity index that Mark Davis developed, it typically also focuses on empathy for negative emotions. So this item, I often have tender concerned feelings for people less fortunate than me, shows that. But also if we look more broadly at these other items, you can see that most of them, again, focus primarily on negative emotions. And as I looked at it, I noticed that this was a pervasive pattern of people typically focusing on the negative side. So it made me wonder if everyday people think empathy is also associated with negative emotions. So one of the things I did is I asked 500 people to respond to the following prompt. I usually feel empathy when another person is feeling blank, and just have them fill in that blank. And what I'm going to show you in a second is a word cloud. So the larger words will indicate that more respondents selected that word, and a smaller word will indicate that much fewer people selected that word. And what you'll see is that out of the 500 responses, over 220 people selected the word sad, over 50 people selected depressed, and as you can see, it's dominated by other negative words like pain and hurt and upset. In contrast, if you think about other positive words they used, happy only appeared 6 out of the 500 times, and only one person selected joy. So if you think about both the scientific literature as well as lay people's understanding of empathy, it seems like the positive side of empathy has been largely overlooked, even though it's a central part of our daily experiences. So in my work in the talk today, what I'm going to talk about is how I've expanded the space that empathy is studied in by looking at the positive side. And I've done this by testing how people experience empathy and whether positive empathy is distinct from negative empathy. And I've also put empathy to the test to see if it can predict things that negative empathy can't. So I'll see if positive empathy can predict helping behaviors better than negative empathy. And also, since we're sharing people's positive emotions, which might boost our own mood, I wanted to see if positive empathy would uniquely make us feel happier and potentially buffer us from stress and loneliness in a way that negative empathy cannot. And lastly, I'll finish by talking about how I'm extending some of this work and some of my future directions about positive empathy. And when I talk about my research today, I'll talk about it at the level of an individual, about how individuals experience positive empathy, but I'll also talk about how positive empathy occurs in dyads, as well as across an entire social network. Also look inside an individual's brain to look at the neurobiological underpinnings of positive empathy. And I'll also tell you about some new results looking at how positive empathy might impact and buffer us from stress by looking at biological responses to cortisol levels. And one of the advantages of looking across all these levels is you can look at the phenomenon in a richer way, but you can also look across levels. So I'll also tell you about results looking at how neural responses to empathy can predict daily experiences of empathy and relationships in our daily life. So I'll start by talking about this first question. In this introduction, I've kind of introduced positive empathy as a distinct construct, but it could be that empathy is just one unified construct, and it doesn't matter whether you're empathizing with someone's positive or negative emotions. So some of the first work I did trying to show that it's actually a distinct construct psychologically from negative empathy, and that it's valuable above and beyond negative empathy. So in this study that I'll describe, I wanted to address this past limitation of only assessing negative empathy. And in particular, I developed a self-report trait scale for positive empathy, and then I wanted to test if it was psychologically distinct from negative empathy. So in this study, I had about the series of studies, but I had about 1,500 participants across a range of different samples, as well as ages. And what all of these participants did is they all filled out this positive empathy scale, which is something that I developed, and I'm happy to go into details about the trait development, but here I'm focused some example items. So they responded to questions like, at a surprise party, I became very excited watching someone react to the surprise. So it's trying to capture this shared positive emotion. And so here you see 3 items, but it's a 7-item scale. And participants also filled out a subscale of the interpersonal reactivity index. So these are the same items that you guys saw earlier, which I'll be calling negative empathy here, because here's really focusing on being concerned and sharing negative emotions with others. So all participants filled out both of these subscales. And then what I wanted to do was look at whether empathy would now emerge as a distinct construct. So what I did was I did an exploratory factor analysis where I put all of the items from these scales and wanted to see whether it would emerge as one unified factor or whether it would emerge as 2 factors or even more factors. And to do this, I did an unweighted least squares extraction with an oblique rotation, which just means that I allowed these factors to correlate with each other. And when I looked at the scree plot, it suggested a 2-factor solution. So a 1-factor solution accounted for about 33% of the variance. But when I looked at a 2-factor solution, it accounted for more variance. In addition, when I looked at the factor loadings for these different factors, they were all consistently high loadings. In addition, they didn't have cross loadings, which suggests that they're potentially distinct. And so just to kind of capture this idea in a different way, what I'll show you next is a correlation matrix of all of the items with each other. So first I'll show you how positive empathy items correlate with each other, but also with items from the negative empathy scale, and also how they correlate with each other. And what you'll see here is a bar, so the brighter colors will indicate a stronger correlation, whereas the darker colors will be correlation. So this is correlation matrix, and if you look in the top left corner, you can see that the items within the positive empathy scale are highly correlated with each other, but not as strongly correlated with the items in the negative empathy scale. And similarly, you see the same idea with the negative empathy subscale. So this is just a suggestion here that it seems like, at least in terms of a self-report measure, positive and negative empathy are distinct factors that seem to be distinct from each other because the items are correlating more with each other than the other scale. So after looking at this question in terms of self-reports, I wanted to build on this and look under the hood and see if people's responses would actually reflect positive and negative empathy are distinct constructs. And one of the advantages of fMRI is you can capture these unconscious responses to other people's experiences and emotions. So in particular, I thought maybe we would see different neural regions for positive empathy because you're connecting with a different type of emotion. So would we see different affective regions when you're connecting with these different types of experiences? So before I launch into the study that I did, I wanted to give you a little bit of background on the fMRI research that's been done on empathy. So most of the research has focused, much like the social psychological research, focused on negative empathy. So typically, people study empathy for pain. So they put someone in a scanner, and they have them experience pain themselves. So they get shocked, or they have something really hot, and they just look at their neural responses. And also, sorry if you're squeamish, but also they show someone else experiencing. So it might be someone hearing a really awful sound or stepping on glass. I'll take that down soon for those of you who don't like that, sorry. And then the thing that they do with each of these neural responses is they look at the overlap between self and other pain. So you can see what regions are being activated for both of these experiences. And what the literature has consistently found is it activates two regions of the brain when you're experiencing empathy for pain. So here we're looking at a slice right through the middle of the brain, a sagittal slice. So empathy for pain typically activates the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex as well as the anterior insula. So here you're looking at the outside of the brain, and this is just a little cutout showing you where the anterior insula is. And people have done a lot of studies, so over 40 studies have been done on empathy for pain. And people have actually concluded that these two regions are the regions for empathy. But one thing that's interesting is we don't know whether these are regions for empathy or they're actually just for negative empathy. So what about positive empathy? Would it activate different regions or the same regions? So that was one of the questions I wanted to look at. And just to show you how robust these findings are, you can see that in this meta-analysis of over 40 studies, again, you're seeing a sagittal slice of the brain. It activates both the DCC and the anterior insula. So part of the study that I did, one of the main goals was to move beyond the past research by looking at more than one emotion in the study, not just empathy for pain, but could we add positive empathy and compare them, and also look at what might be common across them. In particular, I wanted to look for neural differences because I was trying to establish that this might be a distinct construct. So for this study, I had 32 participants come do the study from UCLA. It was about half male and half female. And all of them did an fMRI scanning session in which they did an empathy task. And they also, once they came out of the scanner, rated how much empathy they were experiencing while they were in the scanner doing the task. So I have both self-report and fMRI data. And so just to give you a little background on the methods, one thing we wanted to do was expand beyond empathy for pain and look at empathy for other types of negative emotions. So in particular, we asked people to empathize with other people's anxiety-provoking events. So the instructions we gave them were, you're going to read a sentence that describes a situation in which you'll see a series of photos of different of people in real life who are experiencing this situation. And we want you to take your perspective and empathize and try and feel what they're feeling and how it might be affecting their life. So we really wanted to also capture this real world connection with situations. This is what the task looked like. They first saw a contextual sentence, so this person might fail an important exam. And then they saw 6 photos. Here I'm showing an example of 3. They saw each photo for about 4 seconds. The reason we showed different photos was to try and maintain that empathy for 24 seconds because we're trying to capture enough neural responses during that time. And we also showed them 2 other anxiety-provoking situations. And for all of these situations, we rated to make sure that people found them negative. So we got both valence and arousal ratings. We made sure all the different situations were matched in terms of valence and arousal. They also were asked to empathize with other people's happy moments. So they saw sentences like, "This person just won the lottery." And again, they saw 6 photos for a total of 24 seconds. They saw an additional 2 other key situations. Importantly, these were also pre-rated so that the arousal levels were matched, but the valence was significantly different. Also, when people came out of the scanner, we had them rate how much they had empathized with these different situations. And on average, people rated that they had been concerned and empathic looking events. They rated about an average of 5 out of 7, and it was very similar for how much positive empathy they were experiencing during the happy events. So they're also matched in terms of people's self-reported empathic experiences while they're in the scanner. During this set of results, I'm going to focus particularly on modeling when they're looking at these photos, so really empathically responding. So I'm not going to include the contextual sentence. I'm just focusing on their neural responses as they were looking at the photos. So at the outset, we had some strong hypotheses about negative empathy, given the really strong literature on it. We suspected that it would again activate regions associated with negative emotion, both the DACC and the anterior insula. When we thought about making hypotheses about positive empathy, there wasn't much literature out there, but there is a really strong literature on neural responses when people are experiencing the first-hand experience of reward. So people have looked at neural responses when people are winning money, when they're eating chocolate, when they're drinking something delicious, and that consistently activates 2 regions of the brain. The ventral medial prefrontal cortex, so again, you're seeing a sagittal side slice right through the middle of the brain. And it also activates the ventral striatum. So here you're seeing a coronal slice, which is about right here through the middle of the brain. And so anytime people win money or kind of have these rewarding experiences, it activates these regions. So one hypothesis we had is if you're sharing someone else's positive emotions, their positive outcomes, that it should also potentially activate these reward regions in your own brain. So similar to kind of the concept they had in negative empathy, but we were extending it now to see if it would hold true for positive empathy. So just to show you, this is a meta-analysis on reward. So this is over, I think, about 130 studies showing you how consistently these 2 regions are activated when you're experiencing the first-hand experience of your own rewards. So just a quick summary, we basically predicted that during negative empathy, you would activate regions kind of resonating the negative emotions of someone else, and with positive empathy, you might be activating these regions associated with positive emotion and reward. So in this first set of results, what I'm going to show you is what regions of the brain are more active for negative empathy compared to positive empathy. What we found, as we predicted, was activity in both the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex and the anterior insula, which was really consistent with what we had seen before. We had extended it to a more social emotion or everyday emotion, but this was similar to what we had predicted. And when we looked at the reverse contrast, so what's more active during positive empathy compared to negative empathy, we saw activity in the ventral medial prefrontal cortex, but we didn't see it in the ventral striatum. One reason could be that while these are both regions associated with reward, they have potentially different functions when we think about rewarding processes. So with the ventral medial prefrontal cortex, that's often activated when you're computing the value of something, kind of abstractly thinking about how valuable it is to you. Whereas the ventral striatum is often activated when you are feeling a lot of positive arousal and really experiencing positive rewards. So one reason we thought we might have only gotten this region is because when you're empathizing with a stranger, you might be kind of able to connect and realize that it's making them happy, but maybe you're not viscerally experiencing or having as much positive arousal because these are strangers that you've never met that you're looking at photos of. But we found it interesting, or at least promising, that we were finding this new unique region that was not activated during negative empathy. Yeah.
So the prompts that you gave to sort of frame the photos, was it just the test and the lottery, or were there multiple different positive and negative framing?
Multiple.
Anxious versus happy.
Yeah, so for anxious and happy, there are each 3 different scenarios.
Just because I've taken lots of exams, but I've never won the lottery.
Yes, exactly.
So I can't really imagine my reward system probably doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah, so other examples were like getting engaged or getting hired for a job. And yeah, and we did, that's one of the reasons we wanted the pre-ratings and the self-report was to make sure that people actually felt. And originally we thought we might get enough variance to kind of look at what neural activity was varying with people's self-reports, but a lot of people were pretty uniform and felt that a lot of these, they were engaging a lot of empathy, so we weren't able to do that set of analyses. But so we were happy that it consistently made people. And I think winning the lottery is an extreme too. So we tended to pick these more intense moments just because we thought they would evoke more, be more likely to evoke the emotion. So in thinking about this question, this added another piece to the puzzle, kind of suggesting that at least at the neural level, there seem to be distinct regions activated that are kind of corresponding with the emotion that the target might be experiencing. But one study wasn't really enough to convince me that these are the regions for positive empathy. So more recently, I wanted to look more broadly in the literature and see if I could find evidence that these regions are associated with positive empathy. So I did a meta-analysis, and in particular, I wanted to look at do a more systematic analysis of all the neural regions that might be related to positive empathy. And so the main goal was to see what brain locations are consistently activated. So across all these different tasks, can we find certain regions that are always activated no matter what? And we wanted to, in particular, see if they would overlap with what we know about the first-hand experience of reward and see if they would overlap with neural systems of reward. So for the methods, what I did was I pulled from a larger literature. So there aren't a ton of studies that explicitly studied positive empathy, but I noticed that in the literature there are some cool tasks that actually might capture positive empathy. So for example, observational learning, you often watch someone do a task and they receive rewards for when they do well. And then you usually play the task yourself afterwards. But I noticed that was an opportunity in which people were observing other people receive positive outcomes. So it might be capturing this shared positive experience. So I drew from a lot of different literatures because there aren't a lot of studies on it, but I wanted to see if I could pull from these different studies and see if there was some consistency across them that would suggest what regions are activated during positive empathy. And there are a lot of different stimuli in these studies. So observed others receive pleasant or loving touch or tastes and smells. They often saw people win money. They also saw people receive positive social feedback like praise and things like that. So the stimuli were actually pretty heterogeneous. So if we found something consistent, that would be impressive. So we were kind of looking to see what would emerge. And so I had 25 different studies with about 575 participants, 350 activation foci, which just means different coordinates in the brain. And then for the personal reward study, there was already a really great meta-analysis on this topic. So there were 135 studies someone had done. And so I contacted this person and asked for the meta-analysis, and I selected 42 of those studies that matched the characteristics of the studies that I had in my positive empathy meta-analysis. And while here you're seeing a different number of studies, that I use actually accounts for the fact that we have different sample sizes for the meta-analysis. And so one of the goals was to look at each of them and to look at what might be overlapping between positive empathy meta-analysis and the personal reward meta-analysis. And I used a course-based meta-analysis, which just means we asked the different authors of the papers to provide us all the X, Y, and Z, the spatial locations that they got in their studies, and then we looked at what activations were getting consistently activated across the studies in the same area. So basically, if you plotted all the activation points, would they be clustering in the same area, and kind of show some consistency. So first, I'm going to just show you the results of the positive empathy meta-analysis. What you're seeing here is that it consistently activated the ventral medial prefrontal cortex, which was nice because it seemed consistent with what I had found in my experimental study. And again, suggested that we might be resonating with people's positive emotions, even across all these heterogeneous studies. And when we looked at personal reward, not surprisingly, we saw what has been found in the previous literature, which is that personal reward activates both the ventral medial prefrontal cortex and the ventral striatum. And again, you saw that with positive empathy, we didn't see the ventral striatum. And I would say for the majority of these studies, you're observing strangers. So that's one possibility for why you're, again, not seeing that positive arousal and activity in the ventral striatum, although that's still kind of to be determined. But basically, this replicated what we'd seen in the past literature. And so what I wanted to see was, would these regions overlap, both when you're experiencing it yourself and when someone else is experiencing positive outcomes? And as you could probably predict, we found overlap in the ventral medial prefrontal cortex. So in thinking about this piece and answering this question, this just provided a broader piece of evidence that positive empathy seems to be distinct from negative empathy, but also that it's overlapping with our personal experiences of reward, which is suggesting the possibility of really sharing the positive emotions of someone else. So after kind of developing this construct and seeing that it's potentially distinct from negative empathy, I wanted to see whether it would actually predict something above and beyond negative empathy. In particular, we wanted to test the idea that when you help someone, you might actually be helping them because you're imagining the moment after you help them in which they're feeling joy and relief, and you're sharing in that joy and relief. Whereas past literature has really looked at negative empathy, so when you see someone's stress, that's what's motivating you. And I'm not saying that negative empathy doesn't motivate you, I'm just saying, does positive empathy motivate you in addition, or does it sometimes motivate different types of helping behaviors than negative empathy? So to test this question, the first approach I took was to look at 102 participants at UCLA, about half male and half female. And every participant did a 2-week daily diary. So every night for 14 nights, they were asked to fill out a survey right before they went to bed about their experiences of empathy as well as prosociality. And I created daily measures of empathy, which you'll see will really parallel what you saw earlier with the trait measures. So I created checklists for negative empathy, so people just indicated a yes or no whether they had experienced these items. So, for example, they would indicate whether they had experienced the item, I felt sorry for someone having a problem. So these were 4-item checklists, and we also did something very similar for positive empathy, so I felt excited when I saw someone else succeed. So this is really trying to capture people who are trying to capture people who are experiencing positive and negative empathy and how frequently they're experiencing across all these 14 days. In addition, we measured prosociality in 2 different ways. So we looked at helping friends. So they had a 10-item checklist, and they could indicate whether they had helped a friend do things like helping them fix a problem. And we also wanted to capture things outside of friendship, so we asked about helping strangers, like doing things like giving directions or delaying an elevator. We had kind of pre-tested these all with undergrads before doing that in this study. And for these analyses that I'm going to show you, I averaged across all 14 days. So I was trying to get a sense of who are people high in positive and negative empathy, and looking at how that might predict their average levels of helping across these 14 days. Really kind of looking at it at an individual difference level. In the analyses I'll show you, I used a multi-level model, but as I mentioned, I'm focusing at the between subjects level. And I ran 2 models. The first model was just entering positive empathy as a predictor of these helping behaviors, just to see whether positive empathy even had a relationship with helping as a first step. And as a second step, I entered both positive and negative empathy as predictors of helping to see if positive empathy still predicted something after we've controlled for negative empathy. So what does it add that we can't get from negative empathy? And so what I'll show you here is I'm going to look at how average levels of positive empathy were related to average levels of helping strangers. And what you'll see if you look at the standardized beta here is a strong positive relationship between positive empathy and helping. In addition, if you look at the R squared, you can see that it predicted 30% of the variance in helping behavior. So this was an exciting first finding just to show that there was a relationship between positive empathy and helping. And we saw very similar results looking at how positive empathy relates to helping friends, but saw an even stronger relationship with helping friends. So here, again, you see a strong positive relationship, 50% of the variance being predicted by positive empathy. So this was a nice first step, but we wanted to show what does positive empathy predict above and beyond negative empathy. So this set of results is referring to that second model where I entered both positive and negative empathy simultaneously. And negative empathy, after you've controlled for positive empathy, just was not a predictor of helping. However, when you looked at positive empathy, it was actually a strong and significant predictor. And here I presented the standardized betas, so in some sense you can compare the size of the effect. So you can see that positive empathy is a much stronger predictor. In addition, it accounted for 13% of the variance above and beyond negative empathy. So this was kind of an exciting step as well to show that there's something that positive empathy is adding and might be predicting something that motivates people to help others. And we saw similar findings here. Negative empathy was associated with helping friends, but interestingly, so positive empathy was also predicting it, but was even a stronger predictor. And here it added 14% additional. So while I'm presenting here the trait kind of more average level results, I also looked within the subject and look at how positive empathy would fluctuate with helping behavior across the 14 days and found similar associations. So positive empathy was predicting helping within subject above and beyond negative empathy. So this suggested that positive empathy might be predicting helping behavior, but I wanted to push it one step further to see if the empathy we're feeling for a specific person motivates our behavior towards that person. So I wanted to look within dyads and look in close relationships at how positive empathy was unfolding. So for this study, I had 98 Stanford undergrads, and this time we recruited dyads. So we had 25 male, so they were the same gender dyads, and 24 female dyads. They had to report being close, so thinking about an inclusion of other in self scale, which is about a 1 to 7 scale, they had to report a 4 or higher. And they also had to frequently interact. So we said you have to see your friend times a week because we wanted to make sure people are actually seeing their friend and getting reports of real-time helping behavior. And again, as similar to the other daily diary, people did 2 diaries every night for 14 nights. And so this time I used a 1-item scale for positive empathy. And here what this is really capturing is trying to see how happy you were when your friend told you about something positive that happened to her. And while I'm presenting this 1-item scale, I used similar scales to what you saw before, and the results were very similar. But here I'm just trying to the fact that you might be resonating the positive emotions of your friend. And for negative empathy, we also had this item, which is how upset were you when your friend told you about something negative that had happened to her. And so we captured the person experiencing empathy and their reports, but we also had the friend report on how empathic that person seemed. So the friend also said, you know, how happy, the friend had to rate how happy they thought their friend was when they told them about a positive event and a negative event. So we have both